Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today I'm going to be talking about how change comes when you realize that advocacy looks different for different people. My guest this week is Lily Painter, and I am really excited to share her story with you. Lily is an Indigenous advocate and organizer, and I got to talk with her about her work raising awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women. I learned a lot through this conversation with Lily, so without further ado, let's get started with this episode featuring Lily Painter.
Hi, I'm going to start by introducing myself in my tribal language. So, Kirat Aga Bagatoa Agoy Kan Goya Goya Da. Hello, my name is Lily Painter. My native name is Bringswater. I am a citizen of the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska and the Kiowa tribe of Oklahoma. I'm 21 years old. I currently do lots of policy advancement work for Indigenous issues, mainly missing, murdered Indigenous women, and sort of the intersection between land and body violence for stuff like that. So
Okay, that was a great start. So I would love to go a little bit deeper and have you tell me more about what got you started with your advocacy work. Can you tell me about the experiences that led you to this point?
yeah, so I like to say this to people is I think that not I think every Native person grows up around the issue specifically of missing and murdered people. And when you're younger, it's you take it in as just people go missing and that's just kind of how it is. And so that's sort of what I've grown up with. I'm from a small, it's like a land reservation. It's not state recognized by the state as a reservation, but it is based on our treaties, and if the government followed treaties, that's what it would be. So it's the Kiowa Comanche Apache Reservation here in Oklahoma. And so I grew up majority in a Native town, always surrounded by not just my tribe, but all the other tribes that are centered around the reservation. And so like I said, you grow up kind of hearing about people going missing or, kind of violence against Native people. But there's one centering point that I think is the start of missing and murdered people advocacy for me. And it was a text that I got sent in 6th grade by my mom. And it was pretty much just said it was always typical mom stuff. It's stranger danger, don't talk to people you don't know, don't go with anybody you don't know. But there was kind of a little footnote at the end, and it was pretty much one that was you're in a target demographic for people who want to do horrible things, and it's because you're a Native woman. She literally said that, and I remember thinking oh my God, what, why does that specifically make me at more of a danger to have something happen to me? And so really it's from that point on, it was something that I couldn't unsee almost. It's been in front of me, but it's almost like the curtain had been pulled back. And so it's from 6th grade on pretty much. So I think that's kind of the anchoring point. It started with lots of local organizing, trying to organize MMIW awareness days at school, things like that.
That's so interesting, and it makes so much sense that text would kind of set off those alarm bells and just really stick in your mind. I don't think I've had a guest on this podcast who has discussed the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women before, and I'd really like to learn more. Can you tell me more about the background of the issue and what your advocacy has looked like to raise awareness about it?
Yeah, so the issue itself is kind of this not really unstudied, but it's an unstudied statistic and unamplified statistic that Native people, broadly, but especially Native women and Native femmes, go missing, are murdered, or experience violence at a higher rate than any demographic in the United States. And, that's something that we as Native people have known, for forever, but it's not until recently, honestly, honestly from 2010s on that, there's been research going on of trying to prove what we've known as Native people for a long time. And so, the issue itself is kind of just what is the cause of all of this, and sort of kind of tackling the fact that it's, related to a lot of systemic factors and stuff that stems from, the colonization of our people. The advocacy around it is it's a lot of grassroots work. It's a lot of mostly Native women doing community organizing at the front. So most people say like the starting point, or most people recognize the starting point of like heavy MMIW advocacy coming out of Canada. You know, there's like a series of time back in the 70s where, you know, there was just like a very, very high end rate of, you know, Native women being either murdered or, you know, being kidnapped and stuff like that. And so that's the kind of like kickstart of everything, where it begins, you know, traceably, I guess. But it goes like farther back than that. And, you know, it's like a very long layered thing, but that's like a brief overview of the issue itself.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. So, what are some of the changes that you are really advocating for when it comes to this issue? What would you hope to see change in the future?
I think it depends on like how you approach it too. Something that I had to learn like really fast, I guess, was that advocacy looks different for each person doing it. And so like you kind of go in and everybody's like, you got to do stuff on the government level. Like you got to do stuff on the policy level. And it's like, yes, you do have to do that. And, you know, there are people who work towards that. That's sort of like my sphere. That's where I've, you know, kind of like planted myself. But, you know, for me personally, that kind of like advocacy toward ending this epidemic started a lot with healing from it. So like with kind of like where I've emerged in this area of advocacy is like advocating for the healing from the epidemic. And so like I like to use this example too, is like everybody is taking on multiple different roles like at the same time. So you have women who are, you know, they're policy writers, they're people who are advancing policy, but they're also, on the other hand, somebody who, you know, like I have a friend, her name is Agnes Woodward, and she makes, so like red is like the significant color in the movement, and it goes a lot with like traditional Native beliefs, and it's pretty much, you know, there's a belief that like red is like a color spirits can see, and, you know, just very like symbolic type of stuff. But I think, I don't even know how many hundreds of skirts, but she makes like MMIW skirts for each, you know, family of a victim and stuff like that, and she'll give them out for free. And it's like, that's her advocacy, is like doing it through art. And so I think like for general change, I think I would say like there needs to be like a general like worldwide shift in like how we view advocacy, and like giving resources and funding to like what we would consider unconventional avenues of advocacy. And then of course, like, you know, policy wise, like keeping, you know, a push towards renewing stuff like the Violence Against Women's Act, which was, you know, kind of a big discussion in the past. Just like general state laws that are like languishing. There are just, I don't even know how many I can count that are just, you know, in each like different state, like laws that have either been, you know, there for a while or like keep getting struck down, and just stuff like specific to Native people. And you see Native politicians specifically like pushing really hard for things like that. So definitely, I guess, like in general, more amplification of like all of the things that are going right now, and the people specifically who, like I said, you know, aren't really out in a government space, but they're still like working to actually like tackle the problem through community.
That's interesting. So I know that one of the ways that stories of missing and murdered Indigenous women are told is through crime podcasts, and many of which are so popular, but they can also be unethical and problematic depending on the storytelling approach and the mission of the podcast. What are your thoughts on the role that crime podcasts may be playing in raising awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women? I'd love to get your take on that whole realm of content creation and what effect it could be having.
So like, yeah, this is like a big like weird thing too, because it's like this kind of like goes back. There's a huge disparity in the coverage of missing and murdered Indigenous women cases. Especially when it comes to like social media and like organizing. There's like, on one hand, there's one group of people who are like you said, sort of problematic in the sense where they just like feed off of like drama of like people's lives. And I'm like, that's literally somebody's like, that's like a crime against another human. But they're here, you know, kind of just being like, oh, like the stuff I've seen on TikTok specifically is really crazy. Like no like trigger warnings, no nothing like that. And they open it with the most like horrific line about like a missing Native person. And I'm like, oh my God. And like you kind of like see that with like Gabby Petito. So, you know, within a matter of like a week, you know, you had millions and millions of people, you know, amplifying this one story. And, you know, not to say that she shouldn't have been amplified, but it's like you really see how quick people are to advocate and organize for like certain crimes in certain demographics. And then, when you have this whole like group of people, it's like there's no coverage. There's no people, jumping to say like, why can't we find these 5 women who have gone missing in 1 week on Pine Ridge Reservation? So it's like things like that. So in that sense, I see like a need for like, I feel like the people themselves need to organize around stuff like that. So I do see like that avenue sort of being helpful in a sense of, covering MMIW, as individual citizens. But I think overall, I think something that like most advocates in this area are working towards is kind of like educating how non-Native people go about actually talking about this issue. Because like, here's the thing is like, they also have to remember that there's a certain like proximity you have to have to Native culture in order to talk about it. And it's like, in the same way you wouldn't like there's just certain things you just don't do like when you talk about like Native issues. And it's like as a non-Native person, sometimes they overstep those boundaries when they're trying to help. And so there's a lot of like clash there. So I do see a need for like attention on it for sure from social media. And I think, that can prove to be a good thing. There's many like Native led podcasts about this crime, like the crimes that are happening and things like that. But yeah, I just think it's like a whole thing that everybody's trying to like sort out right now is like, how do we help other people who aren't non-Native amplify these issues without continuing to traumatize us about the issues?
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think it's a really important discussion to continue trying to have to strike a balance where non-Native people can raise awareness in a respectful way that, of course, avoids re-traumatization of Native people. So I have one last question for you, shifting gears a bit. Lots of young people, especially college students and high school students, want to create change and want to make a difference, but they may not know how to get started. Do you have any advice for those people who may be listening?
I would say definitely go with like guidance from the people who like come before you. So it's not, like Native people are very rooted in the idea of like intergenerational knowledge and like felt knowledge, which is the idea that, there's knowledge that transcends like time and generations, and it's something that is like ingrained in you. And, we kind of say that in a sense of like, we talk about like ancestors and like the people before us. And it's like that, we have a connection to that, and that's, ingrained in our culture. But that specific idea isn't just reserved for Native people. Everybody has somebody that they've come from. Everybody has people who have come before them, even if you're not related to them. Like I'm not related to a lot of like Native women who have been, in this movement since the 50s and the 40s and the 30s, but it's like their teachings are the ones that have mainly like guided me, and they guide like everybody else who's in this space. And so I think like in that way, it's like you're able to take wisdom, you're able to take solace when things get hard, because it is hard work, especially anyone in a human rights sphere gets not just burnt out, but it's like it's heavy mentally, it's heavy like spiritually. And so like kind of like taking that with you and just thinking about the people who've come before you and like how there's already a groundwork laid for you, and like whatever you want to do, like if it's not human rights, there's always somebody who's come before you that's there to help you, even if you can't physically reach out and talk to them. It's like there's still like inspiration there, and there's still a path forward. And I would say like that's what's helped me personally, is like definitely like drawing from the strength of others who have come before me.
I really enjoyed this conversation with Lily, and I'm really glad I got to learn about the work she's doing. Lily is tackling such a difficult and pressing issue with her advocacy for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and I really appreciated her explanation of how advocacy looks different for everyone. There are so many different ways to take steps toward improving an issue like missing and murdered Indigenous women, and Lily's advocacy is one way, but as she mentioned, making skirts for the victims of the issue is another way to make a difference. If you're passionate about an issue, there is definitely something you can do and a way that you can contribute to making change. So, the best way to get started is to find that way you can help. Because, as Lily learned at the beginning of her advocacy experience, change comes when you realize that advocacy looks different for different people. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find Lily on Instagram at HercuLils to get connected with her. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at bethechangepodcast. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.